And welcome back to another episode of On Coaching with Magness and Marcus. I am Steve Magness, the Deputy Director of High Performance West, joined, as always, by my good friend, colleague, John Marcus, the Director of High Performance West. John, it's another lovely day to go for a run.
It is, and you know what time it is? It's time to give the people what they want.
It is, and this time we're getting into the details, man. Like, this is probably our most narrow topic we've had ever.
Yeah. This is down and dirty, specificity at its highest.
That is right. We can't all be up in the.
Losing a
Sorry,
line. It's okay.
I'm dying over here.
It's all right.
We can't all be up in the clouds in philosophical world all the time.
That's right. We're coming ground level down from 35,000 foot view to actually get into the minutia, the specific ins and outs of recovery, micro and macro recoveries in workouts, different types of workouts, 800 meter workouts, sprint workouts, threshold workouts, VO2 max, or what I call specific stamina workouts. You name it, we're going to talk shop.
That's right. Items. So recovery, not recovery as in ice baths and all that junk. Recovery as in how much rest do you have in between your intervals? Are you jogging? Are you standing? Are you, doing math games in your head? Whatever it is. What are you doing during that period? And how long is it?
I would actually start off with a quick aside or preface because we're known for our tangents. And recently I went up to Seattle, finally after about 2 years, to go see and shadow our good friend and colleague Danny Mackey, head coach of the Brooks Beast. Their charge had their first big workout of 2018 at the UW Dempsey track indoors. And I wrote about it on highperformancewest.com. So if you want, go back, check it out. I actually post Katie Mackey's workout, which was an amazing session, considering she hadn't done much work and just been running mileage and a couple fartleks and tempos. So it was exciting to see firsthand what that looked like. But I was very impressed. I commended Danny and I commended the Beast. They were very regiment and spot on with timed recoveries. So sometimes it was a jog, sometimes it was a walk jog, sometimes it was just static standing in place. But, they, like Katie, for example, had a 600, 500, 400, 300, 200 breakdown, 3 sets of that, with 2 minutes recovery in between each rep within a set, and then 5 minutes recovery between each set. And man, she was like a clock. When it was 2 minutes, she was, let's go. As I've aged and as longer I've coached, I've become a little less strict with my recovery windows. I should say it's a window. So instead of a pinpointed target time, it's kind of a general within a 30-second or, sometimes 1 minute range here and there. But I just couldn't believe it. The beasts were just like metronomes, man. So, there's an example of someone doing it at a high level, an athlete's conditioned and adapting and responding and thriving to a very strict recovery protocol.
And so I think that's really important because expectations matter, right? Mm-hmm. So whether you're a coach who's wants it very regimented because you think, hey, this workout, the recovery is very important, we need to be spot on, or whether you have flexibility within that window. And even, the norms of it. We were at practice on Monday doing some 800 meter intervals, and I didn't write or tell my athletes what the rest was. And one of my 5th year seniors, Gabe Lara, stands up and says, or when one of the freshmen asks, and they asked, what's a recovery? Gabe goes, hey, I bet I can guess it. And they said, 2 minutes. And Gabe's like, if you've done Steve's sessions long enough and you know the purpose of it, you can probably guess what the recovery is going to be about.
Well, let's go through that. Let's, we gave some very specific examples of recovery intervals. How do you, Steve, going through the taxonomy of different types of session, determine what's the most appropriate recovery time from rep to rep and also from set to set of work bouts within a session?
Yeah. So to me, I think the number one thing I'm I'm using at first is the rep, like, is the repeat itself and the speed of it more important, or is the recovery more important? Because I think that's where you start, where it dictates things, right? Mm-hmm. Do I care the most about hitting 60 seconds in this 400 no matter what? Or do I care enough to keep the recovery interval at a minute or 50 seconds or whatever it is I think is best, where I need that recovery interval to be, pretty dang spot on, because I'm trying to get some sort of physiological adaptation or some sort of stress in that way. So I think step one for me is always, with this workout sitting in front of me, what's most important? Because one gives me leeway, right? And one is like, okay, you should probably adhere to this. So that's where I start, John. Where do you start?
I think of work to rest ratios. So my kind of rule of thumb is you have 1-to-1 work to rest ratio, 1-to-2, 1-to-3, 1-to-4. And when you start to go beyond 1-to-4, you just call it full. Because you get to that point, after about, when you start to multiply out the rest ratio beyond a factor of 4, you might as well just wait until the athlete's ready to go again. So typically my classification is 1-to-1 is going to be for about 5K type work, give or take, a gradient of pace, which is to say, give or take, might be 6K if you're doing cross country, or even 4K, 3K. What that means is, let's say you're doing classic 5K workout 8 times a K at goal, or cut down to goal 5K pace. If you're a normal collegiate male, that might be somewhere in the 15-minute ballpark, so that's 3 minutes. So it's 3 minutes of work, 3 minutes of rest. As you start to get faster, now from that as your anchor, then you start to increase the rest portion of the session. So if I'm doing strict 3K work, then I'm going to choose shorter intervals and durations to run at. So let's say 800 meters, which is pretty tough for 3K work, or 600 or 400 meters. So now, let's just, again, ballpark another athlete. If I'm running, if I'm a higher end collegiate male, and I'm trying to break 8 minutes for the 3K, all right, we got about 6 seconds for 600 or 64 seconds for 400. So now it's going to be a double work to rest ratio. So if I run 64, it's about 2 minutes rest on a quarter. And then now you start to get to mile specific stuff, or 800 meter specific stuff. And this is where it gets fun, and the minutia matters, because depending on the physiological stimulus you want to expose the athlete to, you can either adopt a 2.5 or 3 rest to work ratio, or you can increase it for fuller recovery, so you get the neurological adaptation that happens by running at those very difficult rate speeds. So that's kind of like my anchor. And then when you start to go up the food chain, or up in distance, let's say 8K, 10K, 15K, half marathon, then you start to go halvesies, as I call it. So if it's, let's say 6 by a mile at 10K pace, for, let's say, your competitive collegiate female, that's going to be about 6 minute pace for the mile to 5:50. Well, then, we start to fraction it off, and it might be 2 minutes rest. So that's a quarter of the time spent running the mile is going to be 2 minutes, or a little bit over. Pardon my math. It's late in the day here, and I haven't had my second cup of coffee. And then if they're really good, it might be a sixth, so 60 seconds. So I'm going to ask this young collegiate female, run 6 by a mile with 60 seconds rest. And that's like if you're really fit, because again, what we're trying to do is more hit a aerobic threshold and aerobic stimulus. So then we take a lot shorter recovery. So that's kind of where I put the anchor at. 5K pace, 1-to-1 work to rest ratio. And then as you go faster, longer rest to the duration of time that interval at those race speeds take. And as you go longer in distance or slower pace, then you start to go halvesies or fractions of it. And you can, play around with it as you want. You can go 3/4, a half, a quarter, a fifth, a sixth. You can get all buck wild if you want, but typically that's kind of how I think about work to rest ratios within sets of work. Now, when it comes to differentiating sets from sets outside of sets. So let's say, for example, we want to do, 4 times 400 at 3K pace with 2 minutes rest in between, but I want to do 3 sets of that to get 3 miles worth of work. Now you start to say, okay, I want to get to the higher end of that full, not completely full, but what I call 80%, 85% rejuvenation pace, where the second set you're a little bit more gassed, and the third set the athlete really has to get after it, but they're not starting the set with the gas tank, below half. So what that typically is a 4-meter jog for me, right? So if the hypothetical session here is 3 sets of 4 times 400 with 2 minutes rest, that's about 200 walk jog as you desire, then the sets in between the rest asked is going to be about 4 minutes, give or take. So it can be a jog, a quarter, and then we talk for like a minute about, okay, getting the right mindset or their experience or how they're doing. And again, I'm not too picky if it's 4 minutes up to 5 minutes. And even if they really want to milk it, 5:30. But then at a certain point, I got like a drop dead time. I'm like, all right, you're milking it. We got to go. Come on. We just can't be farting around anymore.
Yeah. So this is going to be a good discussion here, because I use a different anchor for when I come up with my recovery. So my mind does not work in a work to rest ratio type style. I end up at similar outcomes in different ways, if that makes sense. So
yes, expound, please. Expound thy wisdom.
All right. So what I tend to do is, again, I start off with is the speed or the rest the most important? Then I look at, okay, like, what is my purpose of this workout? Am I trying to make it, slightly more aerobically demanding? Am I trying to make it more anaerobically demanding, right? Because people get this a little backwards, right? If you have really short rest, then you don't let all of those anaerobic processes recover, and it just kind of becomes more aerobic. It's why with the 800-meter stuff where you're cranking, you take, 3, 4, 5 minutes rest sometimes, right?
Generous recovery.
Generous recovery. You got to let those systems crank back up a little bit so that you can go nail it again. So that's kind of where I start is, what's the purpose? Aerobic, anaerobic. And then I look at, okay, what am I trying to do? If I've decided that K repeats at 3 minutes for a college guy trying to run 15 minutes is the goal, then I look at and I almost project. I'm like, all right, like I want this to be, pretty aerobic. But what do I think he can do for 6 of these at 3 minutes? Right? Does this athlete need 3 minutes recovery? Could he get away with 2:30? Could he get away with 2 minutes? I'm doing a little projection, right? And that's based on the athlete I know. And it's also based on like, how hard do I want this session to be? Right? Because if I go 1-to-1 and he goes 3 minutes, maybe I think he's definitely going to make that through. If I say, hey, I want these a little bit more challenging in this direction, and I give him 2:30, maybe there's like a 90% chance he gets through. If I go down into 2 minutes, maybe there's a 50% chance that he blows up, right? And it's like how much risk do I want to take, and how far do I push him? So that's kind of how I look at it on these things. Is what am I trying to accomplish? Can this athlete get through this workout with this much recovery, and how much do I want to press it? Because I think we should look at recovery very similar to how we look at almost setting our speed, right?
Right.
So how do you set your speed? You sit there and you think, okay, what's the goal of the workout? Like, is it 5K? Is it, specific stamina? Is it like aerobic threshold? That determines your speed. And then you sit there and you say like, well, I think this athlete can handle doing mile repeats at 440 instead of 445. And you kind of sit there and you're like, oh, this might press him a little bit, but like that's good for him to adapt. And I see the recovery is very similar as if I want to press in that direction, right? Where if I want to say like, hey, I want this athlete to feel a little more or a little less stress, then I'm going to lengthen or shorten the recovery to make that stress, applicable.
Yeah. Recovery within a workout is just as much a stimulus as the actual speed you are running the distance that of the rep. It's the same. It's the same because it's how you ebb and flow. It's how you create this polarization, this harmony, or this lack of, which is going to globally enhance or globally deter the stimulus that you're, the response you're trying to get from that stimulus to then incur that adaptation that you want down the road to make a faster, stronger, more competitive distance runner or middle distance runner. So you have to think about recovery very critically, because you can also too, if it's the wrong type of recovery, you can totally just negate the session you had planned on the piece of paper, right? So let's say we're doing, one of my favorite workouts for milers, that's a tough anaerobic threshold and, speed power session, just sprint 250s, right? And if you go into the terminology of run, you see that the word sprint means maximum effort at maximum speed. There's no reason to start and stop a watch. I always tell athletes when I say sprint, you're going all out for the distance, and how you run out of real estate, you run out of gas, and you start to accelerate. So what? I typically put a cap at 250 for sprint work. For middle distance athletes, you can get away with it with like the really good 800 meter runner, but it's kind of like that's my cap. So that is full. That is 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 minutes, 9 minutes.
Whatever you feel right? Until right. we get tired of waiting.
Mm-hmm. Well, until the battery's fully recharged, right? Because we need to let the ATP, we need to let all these physiological systems resynthesize, reboot, and we know that they can in highly trained athletes, but it does you no good to say, all right, we're going to sprint 250s and we're going to take 3 minutes rest no matter what. That then just turned the session, completely on its head, and now it's something exaggeratedly different, and now you're not getting the intended response and adaptation from that session that you desired. Right.
And I think that's the way you look at it, is that recovery is as much of a manipulator of that stress and adaptation as speed or rep length or any of those other things. It just depends on how we manipulate it. And I think that's where like the artistry comes through, right? It's this push and pull of like you allowing this energy systems, this muscular systems to come back just a little bit, and then hitting it a lot harder, and then maybe coming back and letting them recover fully again. And that's where I think we can really get creative as coaches, especially as we, vary rep length or set or break things into sets, right? To use that artistry, right? One of my favorite things to do is to break things into sets where we might have really short recovery in between, right? So one of my favorite intro 5K workouts is 3 sets of 5x400 with 40 seconds rest in between the 400s. So really short recovery. Yeah. But then in between sets, I might give them 4 minutes, right? 4 or 5 minutes, like bounce back, like come back to life, In the same thing, again, last week we did, for one of our interval sets for our milers, we did, a couple sets of going 450 meters at mile pace, and then a short 150 meter jog straight into a 200 meter like kick in, which is start at mile pace and work it down every 50 meters. And then like 3-4 minutes between sets. So you're looking at a 150 meter jog, maybe 40 seconds, while running pretty fast before and after. But then that set allows you to recover just enough to come back and do another one.
Right. And you need to know, too, I always err on the side of caution the faster you run.
Yep.
So the faster pace, and then you always start to err on the side of caution within the last quarter of a workout. Because the whole design for me of every workout that I try to construct for every athlete is this hypothesis, this very educated guess based on the athlete I know in front of me, what their training has been for however long they've been coached by me, we're there in real time, coupled with all the science and physiological principles and theories that exist out there. Because sometimes we get, physiologists getting these shouting matches where it's like, well, this theory states this principle says this, and this is the perfect model. And last I checked, reality is very messy, and good enough works. And I always go with good enough, because at the end of the day, we're not privy to those perfect conceptualized athletes that you always hear about in these studies that are done, and now we have to do it this way forever.
Well, and that's one of my favorite scientific quotes by I think it was Daniel Dennett, a philosopher, said that when you're in the real world, you create models, and models are taking away the messiness and the complexity of it so that we're left with what is just almost right. But because it's just almost right, we can apply it. And I think that's where we get here is it's really easy to go crazy over ATP takes, X minutes to recover. And, the aerobic system needs this much time, and the anaerobic system needs this much time, and we need our heart rate down to X, heart rate beats per minute. And I think all those things, they can serve some guidance. They're like guidance stones for us. They can also, lead us in the wrong direction of thinking that everyone kind of responds in the same way. And what we're really looking at is what you said, that hypothesis, right? We're making an educated guess of what this athlete can do for a workout. And we're trying to get them race ready. The whole point of every running workout, is readying them to race. Which is why that sometimes we go push to 100%. Sometimes we hold them at 90%. Sometimes we push them past failure, and you design the workout to get them to struggle the last rep so that they can learn how to hang on. So it's like, as a coach, you're sitting there and adjusting the speed and the recovery and all these metrics and saying, okay, for this workout, what point do I want to push them to?
Right. Yeah. And I always remind the athlete, when you call it see God, I call it get your hiney spanked red. Because would you rather have your butt spanked red in practice when no one's here and it's just you and me, or you, me, and your teammates? Or would you rather that someone pull your pants down in a race and just smack the shit out of your butt, and then now you're embarrassed because you thought you were ready to go and you didn't? I'd rather it happen in practice, personally, so then you can be the one given a good spanking on race day, right, instead of receiving it. So that's, another critical element to understand too, that failure in terms of not hitting the paces or not being able to complete the task as prescribed or as requested is okay too. And you just have to be very clear with your athlete and saying, hey, this is what the design of the session is for. This is the point. If you do meet the ask or meet the demand of pace and for the distance I've given, wow, hats off to you. But if you don't, that's okay too, as long as we walk away and you walk away with a critical learning experience that then you can apply come race day.
Yeah, I think one of the consequences of the modern social media workout Wednesday ideal is that we forget about recovery sometimes to hit crazy impressive splits, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
No, everyone says oh, how fast were your mile repeats? They don't say, did you take 3.5 minutes versus 2.5 minutes, right? They say, I closed my mile repeats in 4:30. I must be fit. And I think as a coach, that's where it's really important for you to get that message across. If you have athletes like that, to say that, hey, these splits aren't going to be super impressive. But that's because I've manipulated the recovery or these other things to make it where it's going to be pretty dang difficult to run really fast.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. But you have to like get that across to them, because a lot of times now we want that impressive workout on paper versus maybe the even better workout, but doesn't look as good because you can't run as fast.
Yeah, I mean, even the workout of the day that we have at highperformancewest.com is meant to be a pulsation between highly talented and highly competent professionals who are clocks, who know how to just bang, 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 bang out these, what looks on a piece of paper, impressive bouts of work with very strict or very diligent and deliberate recoveries, as well as the college kid, the athlete coming back from an injury, and because you need to see the full spectrum to understand, like, that workouts don't indicate as much as we'd like to think. You hear us all the time, right? Go to a race, like, oh, well, they've been doing workouts at this pace and they're ready to go and they're ready to do this and they're ready. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. How do you know? Because if you knew for sure, I would want to buy a lottery ticket, the same lottery ticket you're buying, because you can predict the future and I can't. So, like, because what are the numbers for the next Mega Ball? And I'm buying those numbers if you know for sure. Because even I don't. Like, people ask me and I'm just like, yeah, I hope.
So I'll have a blog up on this soon, so you can check High Performance West up. Hopefully it'll be out by the time we put this out. I went through my old running log, and I was like, you know what? I got like 10 years of data on this from the age of like 16 to 26, 27. Mm-hmm. I want to know like when my most impressive workouts were. And I just like scanned the hard workouts that I kind of remembered, and came to a 2-week period where in that same week I ran 50-15 for 10 miles, and then also closed some 200-meter repeats in 23.7, right? So both sides of and then had some really good sessions in between. Both sides of the coin were really good. Did some really good stuff. Ran I think a 4:13 mile in practice, pretty under controlled. Take a guess what my best 1500 was around that time.
I don't know. 3:58.
Not that slow. But
no.
I'm not that slow, man.
3:40. Well, it's been a long time.
It has. So during that time, now I'm that slow. So I ran 3:52. Okay. Which I think,
which is my PR. So thank you for rubbing it in.
Yeah, okay. But my PR is 3:43. So almost 10 seconds off my PR, right? Almost. Right. It was, 8 seconds, 7 seconds off of what I'd run the previous year. And that was probably the best shape I ever was in my life, right? In terms of the workouts that showed things. But if you looked at what was surrounding it and what I was doing, you could tell that I was like on my way to Fried City. Well, I couldn't at that point, but now you can obviously see it, right? And I think that's the mistake we make a lot of times, is that we get in this idealized world where it's like, oh, what did you run your workouts in? Oh, that means you're ready to go. No, that doesn't mean you're ready to go. What means you're ready to go is like, have you prepared specifically for the race? Not, did I run the best workouts I ever have? Because you get lost in the nuance, right? Because it's the weeks, months, etc. to build to that place that gets you ready and able to express that fitness. Not a couple of like really impressive workouts that show that you're fit, but don't show any capability of expressing it in a race.
Right. And ready to go too is not, it's focusing on the wrong thing, right? If you slammed a monster session and then a day later, 2 days later, 24, 40 hours, the athlete's fully regenerative, bouncing off the walls like, oh, I'm ready. Oh man, I feel great, coach. I can't believe it. Oh, I just woke up and yeah, my easy runs, I got to consciously slow myself down. Then yeah, that to me is a little bit more of a tell that they're ready to rock, because the session that you thought was this monster session that they threw down the gauntlet in didn't take a whole lot out of them. And that's constantly to the calculus I'm doing in my head. How much gas are we spending? How much gas is the athlete spending during this session? How long is it going to take for that gas tank days out to get back to full, right? And this, like right now in real time, early indoor track season is the most stressful time of year for me as a coach, because we still got to do some heavy lifting. We still got to do some stout work. But now the athlete's starting to race, and now they want to see some fruits from their labor for the last 4, 5, 6 months of training all fall without any carrots to kind of give them an indicator. Well, coach, I know I did time trial, or I did these sessions and I couldn't do them before, and I'm doing this much mileage. So like we try to, again, create this accounting mechanism of here's all the work globally I'm doing, and yet we're groping in the dark before come race day to be like, well, I think I'm fit. I think I'm ready to, go racing. That to me is where you have to remember, never, never, never blow your race in practice, because you can blow that, load, boom, all over practice, and it's a sloppy mess come race day. Don't do it. Save it, save it, save it, save it. My college coach, who is now at University of Oregon, Andy Powell, is when he was his first year at Columbia, his very kind way to remind us of that was he'd be like, hey, Marcus, keep it in your pants. Whip it out on race day. And I'm like, oh, all right, I understand what you're saying. Because talking to a young, foolish college kid that I was, he was like, don't get too excited when it doesn't count. And remember, you can do the most impressive workout of possible. It can be this awesome thing, PRs. You can set a record, a school record in practice. But if the officiating's not there, the timing, the competition's not there, so what? What? Exactly.
So that was a nice tangent there on things that matter.
Yes. Well, hopefully, a giggle or two, because it was fun to remember.
Yeah. So, but those are the things you remember, right? And sometimes you got to communicate in certain ways to get across to a bunch of college males. I know I have to do stuff like that all the time. So, getting back to the recovery thing a little bit, one of the things that I think is also kind of interesting to explore is that recovery isn't just the time, right? It's do I stand? Do I jog? Do I keep it pretty steady? Sometimes do I keep it dang near marathon pace for some stuff? Like all those things have a different impact. And again, I think the way I handle it is I look at it as, what is the point, right? Am I needing to jog so that I keep things maybe more aerobic because I'm keeping the aerobic system revved up, not standing around, letting that ATP, CP replenish, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm keeping it pretty steady so that every rep is a little bit more aerobic when I start. Or do I want, the anaerobic side to recover so I can kind of nail it, get a little more speed and juice out of it, and a little more recovery so they can nail the speed. And then the other thing I look at is sometimes I look at the recovery as, hey, this is the important part, right? So when I train people for the 10K or half marathon or even marathon, a lot of times what we'll do is, things like 800 on and off, where the 800 on might be at 10K pace, let's say 445 pace for a, a college kid trying to run in the 29 mids. And then the 800 off might go from, 222 for the on. So that would make the off maybe like 250, right? So they're still running 540, 550 pace, somewhere in that range. And they alternate that for a couple miles, and it becomes really hard.
Yeah.
And it becomes really hard because you're allowing insufficient recovery, right? And you have to stay focused instead of turning the brain off and saying okay, I got a couple minutes to recover before I hit the next one. And you realize for that 10K guy, 10K pace isn't that hard for an 800. But when you change the recovery like that, it makes it a pretty damn demanding session.
Yeah, and that's, those manipulations, the idea is you have to, before the workout begins, so even as you're programming training, riding training, think about the state that you want to deliver that athlete to in the last quarter, last fifth, last rep of the session, right? Because that's really where all the gold is. You have to get the athlete to a point that's just a little outside their comfort zone, tax beyond their current capacity, and then subject them to that stimuli or stress so that they can then signal the body and say, uh-oh, time to grow, time to expand, time to adapt, time to change, time to get better.
One of my good coaching friends used to tell me is like, the marathon sucks to train for because you do these big, long, 12, 13, 14, 15 mile, like marathon paced workouts. And he's like, the first 85, 90% of them don't really matter except to get you tired enough where you're like pressing the fuel as far as you can go the last couple, last 2 or 3 miles. So you do all this work to get tired enough so that you can maybe, nail the last 2-3 miles, which is crazy and sometimes, to think about.
Yeah, but it's true. I mean, I was telling an athlete yesterday, she was doing repeat quarters and such, or she did like a little, haphazard breakdown, 2 times 12, 3 times 6, 4 times 4, 4 times 2, and she was on the last quarter, and I was like, this quarter is the workout. The whole point of everything you ran before is to get to this quarter and to run sub 60 right now. That's the point. Give it all you got, because this signal is enough through all the noise of everything else to, that was my bet and my gambit, my hypothesis as coach, to cause the adaptation and change in your biochemistry, physiology, neuromuscular, coordination, force impact on the ground, blah, 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 all the physiological goodness. That one quarter was enough. Where it landed in the workout, that's the caveat, right? So I think sometimes we think they have to be these mega sessions, we got, like once a runner, we got to do 60 times a quarter to get you ready and get you, to squeeze all the weakness out of you, to beat the weakness out of you. No. If you just do a small but very potent exposure consistently, drip by drip, week by week, month by month, over time, the body will get the joke. Because what you risk by doing these mega sessions after mega sessions is actually loading issues, which can then lead to overuse injury issues that then can put the athlete on the shelf. And how many times have we heard about whispers of someone super fit, or they run some invite and they just throw down a nasty mark and then they don't make the conference meet. They don't make the national meet because they just kept getting greedy and they thought it was, oh man, it's, it's like the fat kid at the buffet. Well, eventually you're going to get full and your body's not going to be able to process all the food and you got to vomit it all up. That's the same thing with training. So, and even getting back to recovery, that is the thing I'm constantly monitoring. And sometimes, and most times, if I've guessed wrong, which I'm human and, privy to do most of the time, I actually start extending the recovery, letting the systems, reset a little bit, or throw in like the lactate flushes that I, like to do with an athlete, especially if it's a high acidosis, high anaerobic threshold type session. Calm things down, clear out the toxins, like get you a little bit closer to homeostasis or neutral or energized. If it's the more important thing that day is hitting the pace so that your body can interpret what those speeds feel like to be able to execute and call upon during race day.
Right.
So that's too, I mean, very rarely have I ever in the last 10 years or 5 years stuck 100% to the workout I wrote on paper. It's always changing, and what's usually changing is in that delicate space in the last quarter of the workout is some type of extension of the rest and or shortening of the rep. So I actually did this just the other day, with a 800 meter male coach. The goal of the session was to run a cut down sprint session, 250, 225, 200, 2 by 150, 2 by 100. He's looking good, clicking off, full rest in between. He gets to the first 150, nails it. good. And I'm just like, whoa, that was awesome. How you feeling? He goes, well, and I was like, just run 120 on this instead of 150. And then he does that, he's kind of starting to run out of gas. I go, well, how you doing? And he goes, oh, well, he hems and haws. I go, well, here's the goal of the session is to have you fight to get out good and fast the first 50, which I know you can do, but then mitigate the dissolutive properties that you're going to be exposed to and only have to deal with them in the last 20 meters or 25 meters rather than having to struggle through quicksand, grit your teeth, and bear your way down the home stretch in the last 50 to 70 meters, which sometimes often happens in 800-meter sprint workouts towards the end.
Yeah.
And because, he gave me the feedback, we adjusted a lot of things so that he could complete the session to success to get the stimulus, but he didn't run what I had on paper, especially in the last half, for the duration or for the rest that I had planned, but he ran the speed. And that was what was important that day, was the speed.
So I think that's a good point, is that the athletes will generally tell you what they need.
Yes.
Like you watch an athlete, even if you're just watching them, you start seeing them break down and you start thinking in your head like, oh, he might not make it. And if I want him to make it, then I'm going to manipulate this stuff. And sometimes that's asking him how he's feeling and stuff like that. And sometimes it's, it's also just talking to him to keep the recovery longer without him like realizing it. Right? Sometimes I'll just sit there and be like, all right, I'm going to talk to you for a little bit so that we get an extra minute of recovery without you like freaking out that I'm getting recovery. Especially with college kids who tend to see things on paper and tend to see things as like, if this is, what's written, then it's God's word. And if we don't do it, we failed. So like you manipulate things like that. And the same thing with recovery. Sometimes you can extend workouts or get people back to where you need them by manipulating the recovery. One of the things I love to do is like send people for some easy hundreds or 150s with like 100 or even a 50-meter jog, where I'll just tell them, hey, like go run this 100 in like 18, 19 seconds, right? And just go 4 by 100, 18, 19, 30 seconds rest. We're just gonna get a little bit of work in. That's really slow for a male. And what happens is you clear some of that stuff out, right? You get them a little bit more recovered so that they can come back to the session and then kill something, right? So I do that a lot, especially with my middle distance runners, where I know that, hey, I want to really nail another 400-meter rep perhaps, but I see them start to go the wrong direction, then I'll say, hey, 400s with like a turnaround jog rest, which generally means about 20, 30 seconds. Want them really chill, clear stuff out. They don't think they're sitting there doing nothing, right? And they're not. So you get this long recovery period that also accelerates stuff. And then you come back, you nail a 400 and all of a sudden it's super fast, right? And they're able to hang on until the end, where maybe before they would have started to fall apart at 250, which is too far out for them to fall apart. So you start looking at things like that, where it's like the recovery is in your hands as a coach. It's that artistry of what am I trying to accomplish? And do I need to change this, shift things around in the middle of the workout to make sure that they're accomplishing what my goal is?
Yeah. And I mean, most of the times the recovery or lack thereof within, rep to rep or set to set in workout is the make or break component of the workout. Now, you may have listened to this and be like, oh, dear goodness, I have no idea what to do. I'm, a new coach, or I've been doing this for, a handful of years. How do I get this understanding? And it's just experience. It's just knowing what you're looking for. I was in the same boat. So I picked my rule. I picked my anchor, right? My anchor was the work to rest ratio, 1-to-1 at 5K stuff. And then, going off in either direction, appropriating, either multiplying or dividing. That was my anchor. And that got me in the ballpark. And then as I watched more types of sessions, I watched athletes, ooh, they really tied up there. Oh, that is not what we wanted here. Or, man, that was way too easy. Their affect is real high. They're like, yeah, coach, I didn't sweat that. then you start to have to make the notes, right? And Steve and I, a running sub theme of our coaching practice and what we share, and even on the On Coaching podcast, is reflection. So when I was young, I mean, this is why we have workouts of the day. Someone asked me, "Oh, how long can you do workout a day?" I go, I don't know, 1,500 days at least. Like, I mean, I wrote every workout down for 10 plus years, every single one. And that's not even including my own when I was training, right? I have 10, 12 years of logs of that. But because I took the time, the 5 minutes, the 10 minutes to reflect very briefly, but it was just like getting out the door for your shakeout jog or your training run every day. Because I was as committed to that daily run component, as I was the reflection component, I started to learn, and the learning accelerated. Not in the first year or two, but by year 3, 4, you write it down and then you go back, right? You write it down and go back. And when you write it down and go back, and my thing was I went back once a week and reflected. And that really helped me say, oh, I made this mistake again as a coach, or this athlete did this again. I wonder why. Then you can start to self-educate and put the pieces together. So,
exactly. It's just education. It's watching. And it's also why it's really important to pay attention at practice. Like it sounds like a no duh for a coach. But you have to pay attention because athletes give you the feedback and you watch when they start to fall apart, right? A lot of times I'll make notes of like, Johnny fell apart with 300 to go in the last 400 rep. Like, obviously, if that wasn't the point, I messed things up a little bit in my projections, right? Or I didn't manipulate things exactly right. So,
turn the phone off at practice. I know you have recruits, and you know what? If you're a college coach, even a high school coach, or even like me, post-collegiate coach, there's recruits, there's people calling, there's people checking in, they need something. There were always people needing something before the advent of cell phones for coaching for 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years. It worked out. It was just fine. But be at practice. I was actually driving past a practice. I don't know whose it was, but it was obviously a track team of sorts here in the Portland metro area. And the athletes were doing their warm-up drills, and the coach's back was to the athletes doing the warm-up drills, looking at their cell phone. It took like the life of me not to like park the car, run out and be like, dude, what are you doing? Like, they're telling you everything you need to know before this workout, and your back is to them looking at your cell phone for some reason. It could have been an emergency. I don't know. I'm not trying to harp on whoever the coach and the team was, but just turn it off. That's the best way to not to, to keep yourself from that fallacy, to keep yourself from that vice. Just turn the phone off at practice.
We'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say it was
I will, but still, I just was like, it's easy. I fall susceptible to it too. I actually have to turn it off myself. I'm like, oh, you know what? Steve's texting me again about something. No, Steve, you can wait.
So what I do a lot of times is put it on airplane mode, because sometimes I'll want to like take some high speed video because I'm like a video nerd.
True.
So I'll just flip my phone on airplane mode before, because that'll take me away from like being able to text or do the social media, Twitter scroll and stuff like that. Which again, just keeps my focus on things, because like that's how you learn. Like you learn these tendencies, and I can sit there with my college athletes and say, this athlete recovers faster than this one, and this one recovers better at this type of workout. And this one, when they do some like highly quote unquote anaerobic stuff, they're going to feel like their stomach's churning and they're about to throw up after, 3 reps, regardless of distance almost. So you learn the key tells of athletes, right?
Yeah. And you can know when they're grossly out of character, like, man, they just look off today. Or if a type of session that they've struggled with for many years or, weeks, all of a sudden they have competency and mastery over, you can go, wow, you're doing this really well. This is amazing. And that little personal connection, because you've been methodically, consistently watching with, a keen eye for weeks and weeks and months and years on hand, that goes a long way to the athlete-coach relationship. And I always tell, young coaches, like, oh, coach, how do I learn? I'm so excited. What clinics, what books, what's the best way to like go learn? Should I, talk to, I'm like, go to practice. And, the best way to learn is going to practice.
The other thing I'd add to that is also go watch other good coaches coach. Right? Like, I mean, I grew up sitting at the track and watching, Tom Tellez coach people. Or
it's like how I just went up and hung out with the Beast, last Friday with Danny. I was just like, Danny, I'm just going to be here and do whatever you want me to do.
Yeah.
But I learned a lot. Watching him coach.
And you do. And like I've done the same with Danny. I think I've watched 3 Beast workouts before now. And you learn how different people coach. And I think that's important, and it's funny. At the university now, we've had a couple Australian rugby and Aussie rules football teams coaches come over, and I'm like, why are you watching us work out, a bunch of skinny distance runners? And one of them turned to me and said, like, coaching is coaching. We think you guys are doing something pretty interesting and cool. So I just want to watch you coach. Like, I don't care if I know the details of stuff. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Like, and that pushes me to sit there and I'll be like, you know what? I should watch other coaches of other random sports coach, because
get outside your silo. Yes. The Aussies proved again they're the smartest people on the planet.
Go Australia. Hopefully we got some Aussie listeners, probably thanks to our Adam Diddick coaching with Kraft Australian guru down there, pushing some viewers our way, hopefully.
Yes, and he's the best video out of all of them, again, proving Aussies are the smartest.
Good stuff, Adam. So yeah, it's getting on that. And I think, to tie things together, since we've gone through a bunch of recovery things and gone through what we need, I think that's the lesson on all of this stuff is like, John, we both have different starting points, different anchor points for how we discover or how we decide recovery. But then we have the same kind of adjustment strategy, right? Where it becomes, here's our expectations, right? And that might shape our anchor, but are the athletes telling me what I expect them to tell me? Are the athletes going to be able, what I need them to be able to do in order to get the, the adaptation I want out of them? And if not, we shift things around, right? And it's not a computer program where it's like, all right, for mile reps, I need this amount of recovery when they're this fast. And if the athletes are falling apart and dying and failing unproductively, right, I'm not going to adjust the recovery because this is what we're supposed to do.
Right. Yeah, it's race day relatability. Always, 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 always. An athlete it's not going to move an athlete emotionally for you to tell them what physiological stimulus or energy systems or substrate of fuel is the primary go-to for that day's session. They don't care. It doesn't help them run faster. What I have found, and has worked well for me, is to look through the lens of, okay, how does this relate to their readiness on race day? And then how can I tell them, by doing this next rep, by doing this block of work like such, at this pace with this amount of recovery, this is how the design of it is to impact your ability to do this come target race day, come race day in 2-3 weeks, whatever it may be, come this big invite, so that then they're focused on nailing it, because I have encouraged them and I've told them exactly why we're doing it, to raise their competency on race day. And that's the lens I think we should always be looking through at workout days, especially when it comes to the variance of recovery, is how does it relate to readying them to better compete when it counts, not in practice, as Alan Arvidsson says, not talking about practice, talking about race day.
Exactly. Race day is all that really matters, right? No practice champs. So I guess we'll end with that thought. We appreciate you guys listening. As always, I'm always impressed by our followers and all you guys listening and reaching out to both John and I and sending us some really good questions. And
amazing questions. Yes. I couldn't ask those questions when I was like, I got college kids, high school kids asking me questions. Like, I didn't even start thinking of that until age 30. And you're how old? 22? Brilliant.
I know. So pretty soon you're going to be replacing us, but that's okay.
Yes.
Just remember us as you climb the coaching ladder. Maybe we can, hand out some water bottles and stuff like that.
That's true. That's true. And two, thank you everyone for all the generous and kind feedback at highperformancewest.com. It's been fun. Steve and I are continuing to build it. We're bringing in some contributors, some people we're real excited about. We'll probably announce those here hopefully within the next month or so. I mean, hard part is we're trying to build something, but yet do our primary job, which is build athletes and coach concurrently.
That's right. We are not keyboard coaches, man.
Yes, we have skin in the game. We got our first track meets this weekend. Steve down in Houston, me up in Seattle with the athletes. So, they're always first, right? Athletes come first. That's always been, always will be my philosophy. So thanks for your patience as we try to roll out new, things on hpw.com. But every day you can count on it, just like the big ball of flames to be in the sky called the sun. You'll have a blog post at least and a workout of the day. And then sometimes like an awesome little treat or nugget that just Steve decided to throw out there or I did. So but keep coming. It's awesome. And thank you for everyone.
And keep telling us what helps you, right?
Yes, because it helps us.
Yeah, that's what this is about. This episode actually came from a suggestion from Coach out there, so thank you very much.
Yeah.
But we want to know what helps you guys so that we can tailor our content to making sure that we're making the best impact, just like we would tailor our workouts to make sure we're making the best impact.
Woo! Love it.
All right. Thanks again for listening, guys.
Appreciate it.